Hi everybody, welcome to my screencast where we're going to be talking about test-driven development. So I have a real-life feature which is a search functionality, and along the way of implementing the search functionality there are several things that I want to spend some time with. The first one is a sequence diagram. I would like to explain how the sequence diagram can help us start with test-driven development, at least how I found it useful at the beginning. Then I would like to spend some time to explain probably everything about the mocks. What are the different types of mocks? We might do some benchmarking between different libraries for mocking compared to writing the mocks ourselves. Also, we'll spend some time, basically that's related, the mocks and the designing. And then ultimately we'll spend some time with the contract tests, which are really fascinating thing. And I think it's really important to know about them, leverage them to make them helpful for us. And then, depending on the interest and the demand, I might record a comparison with a classicist test-driven development, because what I'm gonna do with this exercise, we will start with outside-in, and then we'll make eventually the comparison with a classicist if there is a demand for it. So another thing to mention is that I'm gonna split all this in different videos. So the first one, actually this one, we'll start with a sequence diagram, and then we'll cover the rest in the following episodes. So here I have prepared a little presentation. As I mentioned before, we are going to start with Outside-In TDD, and we are going to work on a search functionality. So I would like to explain what exactly we are going to be doing, but before that, a little reminder that this is my Twitter handle. Feel free to follow, and I share there quite some important and interesting content, I believe. And also here is my blog, where you can also find interesting content. Cool. So this is the actual search functionality that we are going to be working. Sorry, had a little issue here with the headphones. So it's gonna be, this is here, of course, a mobile app that I'm showing, but this is applicable to desktop app. It can be web service that you might be working on. The key point when starting with Outside-In TDD is to identify what is the outside that we are gonna be starting with. So here, the idea is that we are gonna have some sort of query and a search button. So when we tap on the search, we have to send out a query, and we would receive states to render in the UI. So the UI would receive, let's say, a loading state. It should display some sort of spinner. Then it would receive another state, which is the actual search results that it has to render. And that's the concept. Basically, the UI has to be very simple, no logic inside at all. We would be following the unidirectional data flow, which means the UI will just send events and receive states to render, nothing else. So now that we know what's going to be our UI. We have to, as I said, we have to send those events somewhere and receive the states from somewhere. So basically, we need that sort of boundary here, and we have identified that we are gonna just send there a query, and now we have to think what that query is, and also how the states are gonna look like so that we can render them. And here I came up with a name which is searcher. That's gonna be our sort of thing where the UI will send the things and receive states from. And as I said before, we have identified what's the query gonna be, what is the actual type, how we're gonna send it to the searcher, and what are going to be the states. So we don't really need now to think about the actual, so we are sort of thinking about the types, how they're going to look like, but the key point here is more about the structure, to think about approximately how everything's going to look like. We don't really need all the details because we'll come up with them as we are going to be working in the code. Now I have that searcher thing, and sorry, that was too fast. We have received the query here, and now we have to think what do we do with that query. Let's say that we need to validate the query, and we don't want to waste all the possible resources out there to make a query that wouldn't make any sense. For example, if the query is empty or if it's short, it wouldn't make sense to perform the actual search. So we would just send back to the UI a result to say that the query is not valid. And now we have to, so we have sort of validation of the query, and we are thinking, would it make sense to do it in the searcher or not? So it's important to think in a single responsibility principle, from the single responsibility principle angle of the things. If I have to change the criteria of the validation, I'll have to change the searcher class. But if I have to change something else that might be there, I'll also have to change the searcher class. So that makes at least two reasons why would I change the searcher class. So that's why I think it would make sense to offload that responsibility to a collaborator. I'll name it here validator. And then I'm again thinking about the communication now between these two collaborators. So I'm gonna pass there the query, for example, as it comes in the searcher, and I have to think about the actual results that are coming back from the validator. Think about, for example, if we just use a flag true or false, valid or not valid, then it would be hard for us to tell to the UI why the query is not valid. But if we think about more granular, for example, it's short, it's empty, it's something like that, if we tell that to the UI, it will be more descriptive to the user to understand what's going on with why the query is not valid. And then next, now let's say we have a valid query in the searcher. What do we do next? Now we have to perform the actual search. Again, are we gonna do that in the searcher, or it would make sense to deliver that, to offload that sort of responsibility to another collaborator? Of course, it would make more sense. So now we would send there the query as it comes, and now the repository should do the search. And now, again, depending on what we are working on, it might do call to database. The repository will make a call to database or to an API or something like that. So in this particular example, let's say that it's gonna communicate to an API, and we would send the query as it is to the API. I mean, of course, it depends what the API requires. Maybe we'll have to wrap this into another type. So we have to, I mean, this is just, as I said, approximate picture of the communication between the collaborators. And then what would the API return back to us? We have to think about that. So it might be 200, 400, some sort of exception like IO or something like that. Now, the repository would have to handle those exceptions or results or whatever, because I don't want low level, I mean, to me, for example, IO exception is sort of way too low level thing to propagate it up towards the UI. So I think the repository is the maximum it should get, and the repository will have to convert it into some sort of business type that will come back towards the searcher. And also, if we receive an error or a successful result, then we would have to, for example, unpack it or map it or do something like that. because most probably we have to do some transformation of the actual raw results that are coming from the API towards into a business business type that we're gonna be working with. So later on, if the API changes, we wouldn't like to change the entire design of our system. And of course, once we have that, we have to deliver it back to the searcher. And here we also have to think about, for example, the threading in the searcher. When the query comes into the searcher, it's from the UI thread. And now everything beyond the searcher has to be done in a different thread because we don't want to make the UI laggy. So we would switch into, let's say, a background thread. So the validation, call to the repository, to the API, and all that conversion if we need to do, and so on, will have to happen in that thread. And then ultimately, once we have the state ready to be rendered, before sending it back to the UI, we have to switch again to the UI thread and eventually send it to the state. So now we come up with sort of an approximate picture of how this would work. And that's the actual sequence diagram that I'm talking about. This is, as I said, very useful at the beginning. It might be useful later on as well, but I expect you to use it less and less as you're getting more comfortable with the outside-in approach. At least that was for me. And also I have to mention that you can do this like writing by hand, but also there are tools online. If you Google sequence diagram, you will find lots of tools that are really cool online that can help you writing the sequence diagrams. And as I said, as you're getting more comfortable, I expect you to use it less and less. But again, even now, after over 6 years of experience, I'm still finding this useful for like when I'm working on some complex things that are coming in the everyday life. So that's everything about the sequence diagram. Give it a try, and would be nice to let me know what you think about this, whether in the comments or just reach out, as I said, on Twitter, or you can find my email on my blog and so on. So that's about it. And then I think we've covered the sequence diagram. Also, I have to mention that if you have any questions about this, also please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you so much, and see you in the following episode where we will start working with the code and spend some time with the mocks. Thank you.